there and welcome to the latest edition of The Front Page. Plenty of racing and off the racecourse stories to discuss in this week's programme, in which myself, Lee Mottershead, I'm joined by two esteemed Racing Post colleagues. First of all, a regular on this programme, Maddy Playle. You well, Maddy?
Very well. Really enjoyed this weekend's racing, so looking forward to getting stuck into that in a moment.
And are you winning?
I'm keeping my powder dry for now, but not doing too badly yet.
I'd often settle for that. And we are joined this week by no less than racing royalty, because the Racing Post industry editor, Bill Barber, is making his debut on the programme. Are you revved up for it, Bill?
Well, I'm going to have to be now, aren't I? I mean, that's quite a build-up you've given me. I hope I don't disappoint our viewers after that.
No, you could never do that. He's worthy of every word. What have we got then on this week's show? Well, first up, and possibly first wherever he goes over the months ahead, Constitution Hill. He was sensational on Saturday at Newcastle. His performance left some people wondering already where he sits in the pantheon of all-time great hurdlers. It wasn't just him. Presse was also superb at Newcastle, causing us to ask, as a festival force, is Britain back? Nico de Boinville didn't really need his whip on Constitution Hill at Newcastle on Saturday. He might not need it at Cheltenham as well, but the festival will be the focal point for British racing's new whip rules. We'll be looking at those. And although the wider media hasn't yet taken much of an interest in the whip, there have been plenty of stories on gambling as we count down again to the government's gambling white paper. Some people are even saying that BBC Radio 4 should ask for racing tips from the Today programme. It is hard to believe, but it is true. Also hard to believe, Maddy, for some, was how sensational, how sublime Constitutional was in the fighting fifth. What did you make of it, and what's the wider story?
I thought he was faultless. He was absolutely flawless. I really enjoyed this weekend's racing. On Friday as well at Newbury, we had some really good performances. And after Ascot and all the non-runners, everyone was feeling a bit down and defeatist. And I just think this was exactly what British racing needed. We needed its stars to come out and shine. And blimey, in the case of Constitution Hill, they certainly did. Presse was brilliant. We had Paisley Park v Champion, that wonderful long-distance hurdle. Lucia and Jet Powered, two of the Henderson leading lights to throw their hat into the novice hurdle races. So this is what we needed to sort of really get enthusiasm up. Fighting a battle to become on a par with the Irish Challenge, such is their strength and depth. But I think Constitution Hill, well, I mean, the bookmakers said that the champion hurdle is pretty much over. I mean, that was premature, but Racing Post ratings have him as third best hurdler of all time behind Isterbrack and Forheen, and he's still not exposed. He's had one run in open company and he's been absolutely brilliant. His hurdling technique was superb. He was very willing to quicken when Nico asked him off the home turn, then quickened again. And he just doesn't seem to have a chink in his armour. I thought it was a brilliant run from Presse, now 7-1 for the Gold Cup as well. I think people could be at danger of underestimating that performance, because to do what he did and give a really progressive horse like Into Overdrive that much weight was fantastic. And a good horse in third as well in Happy Go Lucky. He made one mistake, but other than that was his usual brilliant self in the jumping department. Great to see these horses running in handicaps. Great to see Venetia Williams with a live Gold Cup contender. So it was a really sort of confidence-giving weekend if you're a British racing fan. Not sure how that's going to mean the rest of the season is going to play out, but I'm really looking forward to it. And I think we just needed a bit of a boost, didn't we?
I think we did need a bit of a boost. The previous Saturday was difficult at Ascot. Obviously, a lot of difficult headlines, but I think, as we said on the show last week, I had great sympathy for the train. I just thought it was a ground issue last Saturday. Nobody's fault, just it was what it was. Bill, I made the trip up to Newcastle on Saturday. It's a long way from Surrey, but it was very much worth it. Tremendous buzz around the place, huge engagement with the action, and particularly with Constitution Hill. I was looking down the roll call of winners of that race and speaking to some of the locals, spoke to two locals who've been going as far back as Comedy of Errors, 3 wins in the race in the 1970s. But you look at that period, you've got Comedy of Errors, you've got Sea Pigeon, you've got Night Nurse, Bird's Nest, a real hurdling superstars from that golden age. Are we getting a bit carried away at the moment to start saying Constitution Hill could be up there with them, or are we right to be excited?
Oh, definitely right to be excited, and he definitely could be up with them.
Yeah.
It is probably a bit early to say he is.
Yeah.
But I mean, Maddy's absolutely right. It was hugely exciting performance. As Maddy says, flawless. He's tactically versatile because he's made it from the front. He's got tactical speed. Jumping was superb. I mean, I'm used. Given my age, I'm a bit of a curmudgeon, and whenever people start hyping up horses, I'm more than happy to grunt and think, no, thank you for that. I'm more than happy to grunt and say, oh, he's not that good, let's see. I mean, he is obviously very, very good. He needs, he needs to win the champion hurdle to be spoken of in the same breath as Night Nurse and what have you, but yeah, he's very good indeed.
It's hard to believe though, isn't it, that at this stage in the season, bearing in mind Honeysuckle just doesn't lose and has been imperious in 2 champion hurdles. She's 9-2 against a 13-8 on-shot. Remarkable betting.
I think with this case, and with any debate, we saw it with Baid and Frankel during the summer months, it's how you measure greatness, isn't it? And if we're going on what Constitution Hill has achieved, then of course he's not going to match the likes of Istabraq, Faheen, because he's not been given the opportunity to do that yet. Ruby Walsh beforehand was talking about, well, I don't know if he'll be able to replicate what he did in the Supreme. Well, he certainly did at Newcastle against a better quality of horse in Epperton, or at least we thought so, obviously stepping into open company. So it will be whether Constitution Hill can do what Honeysuckle has been doing and keep churning out those high quality performances. But if you're talking about an isolated race, if you're talking about the time, I mean, it was considerably quicker, as you'd hope and expect, than the juvenile hurdle and the other race over the trip on the day. So the world is his oyster, really. But it depends on how you gauge him. I think there's been a lot of chat about Honeysuckle. I think we need to give her some credit. She is the one who has those performances to her name. She's been doing it, maybe not pretty every day of the week, but that's what great racehorses do. They keep churning out these top-class performances. Some suggestions that she might be retired or even rerouted if she's not absolutely on her best form. So I really hope that she returns at her best, because this is a matchup that we all really want to see.
And if you two were bookmakers, if you had your boards on the racecourse or your website, would you be comfortable offering much bigger than we've got now about Constitution Hill, or do you think the price is actually pretty much about right?
Oof, that's a difficult question. I wouldn't fancy going much more generous.
No.
I've got to say. I mean, I did like State Man when he won, so it's not just a 2-horse race at the moment. But yeah, I wouldn't fancy being too generous about Constitution Hill.
Just on the point that you mentioned as well earlier, Maddy, one thing I mentioned in the Racing Post piece I did from Newcastle on Saturday as well was how good it was again to see another horse define top weight in a handicap on Saturday. Not everyone likes the idea of horses, these Grade 1 horses, giving away weight in handicaps. I think it's a fantastic thing. We've seen it this year with Grenadine, Frodon and others. And I think it's what jump racing historically has always been about, the top horses being asked to give away weight in big races. And what we've seen all through this season so far is that when they do it, they'll often win.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because it'll encourage trainers and owners' connections as a whole to generally look at the programme book. After Constitution Hill didn't go to Ascot, there was some talk about, there's not many options for him, and Lewis Porteous actually wrote another view on this and how trainers just need to be a bit more creative with where they're looking in terms of handicaps, in terms of, even Constitution Hill would have been eligible for the race that First Street won, I think. So
he would, yeah.
Yeah, it's great to see people trying something different, and I think that's what we should hope to see more of throughout the winter.
Brilliant. One last question on this one. Does Constitution Hill win the champion hurdle? Bill, yes?
Yes.
Maddy?
Yes.
Yes, it's a yes from me as well. OK, so that one then wasn't a controversial story, with no disrespect to Honeysuckle. The next one is more of a controversial story. It's based on my column in today's Racing Post, looking at the latest situation in the debate around gambling as we count down, as I said before, to the government's long-awaited gambling white paper. We've had a front page story in the Times this week that looked at numbers increasing in terms of those using the NHS's problem gambling clinics, but what the story perhaps to an extent skirted around was there are many more of those clinics. So you'd expect people to be using those clinics to a greater extent. In a general sense, it felt like it was part of the ongoing narrative among wide sections of the media and extremes of the media too. There aren't many stories that get the Daily Mail and the Guardian united, but their at times antipathy towards gambling would appear to make up one of those stories. There's a really powerful, it seems, anti-gambling lobby that's built up across different sections, across the health service providers, across clerics, across commentators, across regulators, analysts, politicians, broadcasters, journalists, and increasingly it feels as though the point that they're trying to make, as I say, we count down to the white paper, is that the problem isn't just with problem gambling, that with gambling per se, and that gambling is a public health issue that should be demonised. Now, that is not a view that I agree with at all, but then when you looked at some of the responses to that Times story midweek, you had some people, one from a BBC broadcaster who now works as a cleric, you had a Financial Times journalist, both saying that they take the view that Radio 4 should even ban the Tips from Today programme, because that's bad for the public at a time when there's a gambling issue as they see it in the country. It seems to me that it's all going too far and that the debate has become very, very heavily distorted. Bill, as industry editor, you're always writing about this. Is it fair to say that those who want to see very stringent measures imposed in the gambling legislation that will follow the white paper, that they are now taking the view, they're presenting gambling as an issue in itself as opposed to just problem gambling?
I think there are definitely elements of that group who are. I mean, and I've spoken to them, there are plenty who say, look, we're not anti-gambling, we're just anti the actions of the operators. And the operators have presented campaigners with plenty of open goals over
fixed odds betting terminals.
As a case in point.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is a snobbery about gambling.
Yeah.
Sort of an attitude that people who have a bet should be more pitied than censured and should be protected from themselves.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult one. It is going to be a continued debate. We've got the white paper is going to be due out depending on who you listen to. The DCMS want to get it out before Christmas. Whether they'll be able to do that before Christmas is up for debate.
And when they eventually get it out, do you suspect it will look like the white paper that would have been presented had Boris Johnson not left office and Nadine Dorries and Chris Philp had still been the people within the DCMS forwarding it?
I think so. There was a story in the Times on Saturday that looks as if it was briefed by DCMS. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the detail in there was stuff that was coming out during the summer. So for horse racing punters, it mentioned affordability checks and unintrusive affordability checks rather than ones where you're being asked for your bank statements, and that was being reported during the summer. We reported that during the summer. There's things like the maximum stakes of online slots and will come down to the same as they are in betting shops on fob tees. The only thing that looked new in there was a mention that free bets wouldn't be banned, which had been the case before. Which has, and there is campaigners are calling for that to happen. So, I don't think the white paper will be hugely different to what has already been reported, but then it's what happens next after that.
And on that question, what happens next? To what extent do you believe the publication of the white paper will be simply the start of a massive lobbying exercise from both wings, if you like? Or will the government, given the white paper has taken so long to appear, actually want to get it pretty much as it's on the paper?
Yes, I mean, they'll want to get it out, basically. Yeah. I mean, the DCMS's main priority at the moment is the online safety bill. So they want the gambling review out there.
Done and dusted.
Yes, and they don't want to have to do it through legislation because there isn't really the time and there's the chance for things to be amended. So it'll be, I imagine a lot of it will be pushed to the Gambling Commission to change their sort of licence conditions. So there will be a great deal of lobbying. I think on affordability there will be a consultation. So there will be a lot of toing and froing, I think, still, whatever happens.
Maddy, there's nobody would deny that there clearly is an issue with problem gambling. There are people who become addicted to gambling, as there are people who become addicted to cigarettes, to drugs, to alcohol, and all those people need to be helped, and everything that can be done should be done within proportion of the wider consumers of all those products. But do you take the view as well that Bill mentioned, that a lot of the critics of gambling do so from a position of snobbery? I made the point in the column that, you know, the report from the FT that took the view that the Radio 4 tips were wrong. Well, they're writing about share trading all the time. Yeah. You know, if you're going to, you can lose a hell of a lot more money doing that than having a bet on the 310 at Kempton.
Yeah, I think attitudes towards gambling, in my experience anyway, being a woman for one, and, you know, when I was younger, certainly I was always advised, don't go into the betting shops. You know, it wasn't a place for kids, and every time the Grand National would be on, I'd send my stepdad in there and he'd place the bets and that sort of thing, and it was kind of seen as a dirty thing in my family. But nowadays, and I think this is key, with, you know, the explosion of online gambling, it's not seen as that anymore, and I think that's important because it isn't obviously always you know, troublesome, problematic. I was speaking to members of my family who aren't interested in horse racing at all, and they were saying about how they've got bets on the World Cup and things like that. And even now, you know, my mum back in the day would have said, you know, or don't gamble. Whereas now, you know, I've sort of explained that actually it can be done safely and enjoyably, and that's how most of people experience gambling. And I do think with the younger generation coming through, there is an enthusiasm for betting, and I think largely it's a healthy one.
You mentioned the World Cup. You two both had World Cup bets. Were you football fans?
I've barely seen a match, Lee, to be honest with you.
Bill, you're a Leeds United supporter, so you like football.
Yes, some would say that. Yes, I gave up punting on football a long time ago. I was no good at it, and so the last bet I had was actually on Leeds to get relegated as a sort of emotional hedge. So no, I haven't had a bet. I'm just watching.
Protecting yourself
there
with that one.
Exactly. No, unfortunately, it almost came in.
Yeah, I'm sure, like me, Bill's just waiting for Eurovision to really get properly involved. Bill, your first time on this programme, and already you've been given the stick.
What a beautiful segue that was.
Thank you.
Yes. So, whip rules is, and has been for what seems like decades, a constant talking point in the sport. It's taken a while, but the BHA announced last week what was happening with the latest changes to the whip rules, which are coming in the new year. So various rule changes. There's going to be a bedding in period starting on January the 9th.
Starting on my birthday.
Oh.
Happy birthday, have some whip rules.
For the jumps, and in February, the bedding in period for the flat. So you're going to have bigger penalties for going over the limit, which will be doubled in the big races. You've got the potential for disqualification if a jockey hits a horse 4 times more than the limits, which have stayed the same.
8 on the jumps, 7 on the flat.
Exactly.
Yep.
There's going to be a whip review committee that's going to look at cases, and then the other rules that have already been mentioned, that you're only using it in the backhand position, for instance, which is not a thing that I'm going to comment on particularly because I'm not a horseman. So these new rules will be coming in, bedding in a bedding in period for jockeys to get to run into the new rules, but without the new sanctions. And it does strike me that perhaps the BHA has learnt the lesson from what happened with the last time the rules. There was a big change to the rules, which is in 2011, when, as I remember, I think the rules came in on the Monday before the Champions Day, and all hell broke loose.
Yeah, I remember it well. I was ghosting Richard Hughes' column at the time and he stopped riding.
I've got a feeling, though, that
Yes.
when push comes to shove,
Yes.
that it won't be smooth sailing. I mean, I think Matt Chapman tweeted about the whip rules and various well-known jockeys, Matt not being a fan of the new whip rules.
He does tweet quite a lot as well.
Yes, absolutely, and various well-known jockeys like the tweet.
Yeah.
So we'll see, I think.
What about, Maddy, there were new things that we learned last week. Yeah. In some ways, as well as the bedding in period that Bill was talking about there, the other really interesting thing was about the DQ situation. And obviously, when the new whip rules had been presented, there was concern that punters would be turned off the sport if their horse wins a race. Stewards then work out that the jockey has gone 5 over the quota and the horse is disqualified. That won't happen. The results will stand on the day if there's a whip infringement. Then it will go to this committee that Bill spoke about the following week, and then a decision will be taken there. Is that something that seems like a good idea to you?
Yes. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you've backed the second horse and the rider has broken the rules on the first horse, you're going to be feeling a little bit put out. But I don't see a way in which we could have a quick, fair process to punters that wouldn't just confuse matters and make everything a nightmare. I think the easiest solution is to go with the result as it stands. People will get paid out and then let the sanctions come into effect afterwards. I mean, look at this year's Grand National, for instance. You just couldn't have that many punters waiting to find out. You know, even if the first 2 horses were to be thrown out, then, you know, the third horse, it just doesn't feel like a logical moral winner. And I don't see how that could work. So I do think that was a really good move. I'd be interested to hear Bill's thoughts on that. Do you think that's the best thing for punters and for the industry as a whole on that side of things?
I've been thinking about it. It's the sort of the lesser of two evils, I think, really. I don't think either position's particularly ideal. I mean, the saving a disqualification for later, I think, was done after consultation with bookmakers. I must admit on this argument, I don't know if you're probably too young for this, Maddy. If you remember the Fast Show, there was this sketch where Paul Whitehouse would be in the middle of 2 people in a pub having an argument, and Paul Whitehouse would agree with whatever the last person said. I'm a little bit like that on the disqualification thing, but on balance, I think it's probably best not to do it on the day.
I can see what you mean by lesser of two evils, and you know, will the sport start to look silly if winners are chucked out the following week? But on one hand, one would hope that because the DQ threat is now there, that jockeys won't go over their quota, that we won't need to. It'll happen at some point, but it won't be a regular thing. But also, we do get situations anyway where after a big race, it's not unprecedented for one of the connections of a beaten horse to lodge an appeal against the winner. That then goes to a BHA panel, and that result can be changed. We had it with the appeal after this year's St Ledger over the second past the post Hascoy being thrown out. So it's not unprecedented. Is there a danger that we're trying to find a problem in the rules that doesn't really exist?
Could be. I think a lot of this is going to be how jockeys adapt to it. And they've given that bedding in period. Some people are concerned that the proximity is quite close to the Cheltenham Festival.
Patrick Mullins spoke about that, didn't he?
Yeah, the spotlight's going to be on the sport on that stage. But For me, I think if jockeys themselves, we listen to them and they're confident that they can adapt in the right way, then as you say, Lee, hopefully there won't be too many occasions where things will have to go beyond, and we're talking about many, disqualifications. Hopefully that won't happen. So I think at the moment it's just important to listen to our jockeys. They've been involved obviously in the consultation process, and I know many are already taking the approach to try and use the whip in the correct manner. So if they're thinking like that already, then fingers crossed we should be in for as smooth as can be a transition to a new set of rules.
Yes, fingers crossed indeed. Time then now to wrap up the programme and decide which of this week's 3 stories should be go down in the annals as the winning story this week. Well, my own story, the one about the gambling situation at the minute and the commentary on gambling as we go towards the white paper, clearly a very important story, but it's a story that's going to run, and we'll know more when the white paper actually comes out. So we'll defer maybe my victory on that one for a future date. Bill's story on the whip, Bill, very, very important indeed, and you presented it beautifully for your first effort. However, I do think if you won on your first appearance on the show, it would lead you into a false sense of what this is actually like and make you think it's too easy. So you'll have to wait until your 4th, 5th or 6th appearance until, I think you should be winning regularly. And Maddy, ultimately, one of my things I keep going about, we talk about horse racing industry, but first and foremost, it should be a sport. And the sport is all about the horses, and nothing gets us more excited than a really superb racehorse, which is what Constitution Hill looks like he is, what he clearly is. It was a great day at Newcastle on Saturday. As you say, it hopefully bodes well for the British Challenge at the festival, and we all want Britain to be really competitive at Cheltenham in March, and for that reason, Maddy, you are the winner this week. Bill, apologies.
Exactly the right decision.
Thank you. Before we go, I have news to pass on regarding the excellent Racing Post app. You should be downloading now our new app, exclusive content from the biggest names, including Bill and Maddy, free daily tips from our star tipping lineup. It is well worth downloading. It's an excellent thing indeed. I hope you've enjoyed this week's edition of The Front Page. Thanks to Bill and to Maddy. We will see you soon. Bye-bye.